thought that I would talk a little bit about something that I have been kind of working through in my healing and in my journey through healing trauma in my life, and regulating my nervous system and learning better like emotional regulation, and learning how to feel what I'm feeling so that it doesn't stay within my body and affect my physical health. And I thought that I would just kind of talk a little bit about some really difficult struggles that I've noticed happen since venturing more into healing my trauma, which is a lot of cognitive dissonance when it comes to my faith. And I thought that I would talk about this because maybe it can help me to process my own thoughts, and maybe it can also help somebody else who might feel and think the same way as I do, and maybe struggling in the same ways. So I think growing up, I learned a lot that my faith was really there was a lot of emphasis or focus put on suffering well, quote unquote, suffering well. And that basically, as we go through life, suffering is a part of life. It is something that doesn't necessarily need to be, I guess, tried to keep at a distance, but instead embraced as, just a part of life, just a reality of life. And we are supposed to, I find it to be interesting because there's like this paradox kind of where we are supposed to help each other, carry each other's burdens, and be there for one another and help one another when we are suffering. But then there's very much this, like, I think, expectation kind of, where when you are suffering personally, you are part of suffering well is to not burden other people with your suffering, basically, to kind of carry it with Jesus, to carry it, well, I guess. That's kind of the message that I got, that was kind of ingrained, I guess, in me in some sort of a way. And there is, just carrying your cross well, suffering well. These are terms that I came to hear while I was growing up, or within my life, within my family. And I came to appreciate and to understand the ways that suffering can really help to, I think, shape us into who God created us to be. Often, it is suffering that makes us more empathetic towards others, more compassionate, more able to see others in their suffering, I guess. That ties into the whole empathy portion, but also teaches, I think, a lot of like humility and humbling. Happens, through suffering and all of that. So I can see the good in suffering. However, I think it's a very fine line between having that kind of a mindset and an outlook, and using that as a manipulation to guilt others into silencing themselves, silencing their voice, so that accountability doesn't need to be taken, so that there can be a lot of like avoidance. There can be, a lot of just manipulating it so that guilt then gets put onto victims of abuse. And when that happens, the victim internally can, I think, begin to think and feel that if they speak up about what has happened, then they're not suffering well, they're not carrying their cross well. If they speak up about what they've experienced, or they try to get accountability, they can be made to feel like, they're the ones in the wrong because they are not being forgiving, they are not, I guess, giving grace or having compassion on the person who has harmed them in some kind of a way. And so I think that it can become like a dangerous kind of place to be, and way of thinking. So as I am unpacking a lot of this, and as I'm thinking about a lot of it, I just, realize that there is this very fine line, and it becomes really hard for me to differentiate between what I believe, I guess, and I think that, especially for women, we are made to feel like anger is not really a characteristic of like a godly woman, or it's not a very, like women are supposed to be gentle and kind all the time and not really display these anger feelings and emotions and all of that. And so I think that also can just perpetuate further harm and abuse, because women are then conditioned to, again, be guilted and feel bad if they do have a righteous anger over things that they should be angry about. And then in turn, they, a lot of the time, I think, will try to suppress it or repress it, feeling like it's not okay to feel, it's not okay to, be in this kind of space, emotionally and spiritually, it's somehow wrong. And in turn, it causes a lot of damage and a lot of harm to their physical health, to their mental health, just overall. So I think that there also tends to be this avoidance kind of over certain things, or if there is any addressing of like trauma or something of that nature, it might be addressed, but I think that it's kind of rare for people to really accompany or walk with people through their entire healing journey, as they, go through it, because it is really intense. It's really hard. It's really uncomfortable for people to, I think, withstand that duration of time that it takes. And there's this like expectation that things should be moving along quickly, that it should just be something that people move on from and get over, kind of. And if people are stuck, it's often viewed as, holding on to a grudge or not being forgiving. And then again, the blame is actually put with like the victim rather than with where it needs to be, which is the person that should be held accountable, or the people that should be held accountable. And it becomes this like really difficult thing for somebody who is trying to heal and make sense of things, because it can feel like, they have to basically either comply to fit in with these people around them, where they pretend like they just move on from things just to appease other people, to kind of stay with the group. Or if they decide not to, they often will lose, support, or lose their people that were supposed to be around them to help them walk through everything. And I think that it is just hard because one of the things that I also have learned in learning about my faith is the lives of the saints and how we are called, at least my faith believes that we are all called as human beings to become saints, that God created us all with the capability to do that and to become saints, and that is like the overall goal of all of our lives. And one of the things that I've actually enjoyed the most about my faith and walking through it and, you know, learning more about it is learning more about the lives of the saints, because they are just really fascinating, they're really interesting, and you can just learn so much from them. However, there are certain things that just are so unsettling to me. I think especially working through trauma, and then I think when you have kids yourself, if you are somebody that has experienced really severe trauma in your life and you have kids, you start to think a lot about, like, is this what I want my kids to learn? Is this how I want them to view things? Because ultimately, is this going to help them to become, you know, assertive, and is this going to help them to, you know, have this healthy way of thinking instead of being easily manipulated, and, you know, things of that nature. So one of the things that I noticed is that in studying the lives of the saints, there was one saint in particular, as I was in the middle of going through my healing from pretty severe sexual abuse in my childhood, which to me continues to be the sole most difficult trauma of my life, mainly because I experienced a lot of, I think, really intense psychological abuse, and it has felt up until the last couple of years like I longed to access this part of myself as a child, you know, this inner child, I guess, that saw and heard things that I couldn't access, that I didn't know. And it was the strangest feeling, and is the strangest feeling, to live in an adult body that within your adult body still carries the experiences, the memories, the emotions, the feelings of your entire life and existence from the time you were born and on. And there are parts of yourself that have lived through things and have literally visually seen things and heard things, and your voice has spoken things that you are so disconnected from, you have literally no access to. There's like this almost like this cord that was cut that just kind of separates you from yourself, kind of. And trying to reach that part of yourself so that you can reconnect and you can get that information so that you can heal, so that you can go on to process things and fully heal. And for me, that was the most difficult thing, I think, throughout my entire life, was pretty much immediately, I think, after the trauma that I had experienced, that disconnect happened, because I do not recall at any point throughout my childhood actually being able to connect to myself in a way where I could, you know, uncover these things. But the people around me knew. The people around me knew what I said. The people around me knew, you know, all these things about me that I did not have this access to. And it's a very interesting and strange thing to be able to sit in the place that I am now and understand that and know that, and just, you know, piece so many things together. It's been a wild ride. But so through therapy, the last couple of years, I was able to uncover court records through my therapist where, for the first time in my life, I held in my hands and looked at and visually saw the words that I spoke when I was that little girl, when I said the things that I said had happened to me, and when I was able to see them and hear them, in a sense, like really visually kind of see myself, it was healing in some ways, because I was finally able to connect to that part of myself. Maybe not entirely, but at least more than I ever had before. And I had this outpouring of compassion and empathy for myself, and love for myself, and just admiration as well for the strength that I had that I shouldn't have had to have at that age. But I started to see a lot of things differently. It changed me, I think, in ways where I will never be the same ever again. When I think about it, I just realize how much I was failed, how much of a lack of protection and justice I received. I realize just so many things that I cannot really even put it into words. I guess I'm trying, but I feel like I am dissociating a lot even now talking about it. It's very hard, but it has been really, really heavy, and I don't want to continue to go on throughout my life keeping it in and not talking about it, and not expressing my thoughts over it or my feelings over it, because I feel like it has greatly affected my health, like my overall physical health, my mental health as well, but my physical health, which has been hard. I think that there are certain things that I would have struggled with even if I wouldn't have experienced the trauma, but I feel like it's definitely made it a lot worse. And I just know that, it can not be good. So to hold everything in and to not talk about it. But where I have really wrestled with the cognitive dissonance with my faith is that I think I was raised and came to understand through my faith, like, you're not supposed to complain, you're not supposed to, be angry, I guess. And even when I started to get more into studying my faith myself and like reading the Bible, I remember going through Matthew where Jesus, I think, says that you have heard it said that you should not kill, but I tell you, do not even be angry with one another. And if you're somebody that takes that literally, like I am, that can be really difficult, because if something really severe happens, if there is something that you need to be angry about, you should be angry about, like I said, you can feel a lot of guilt over it. But again, I think that is one of the things that it's really important to look at it from not just that perspective, but if we are to imitate Jesus in all things, Jesus also displayed a very righteous anger where he flipped tables over. He displayed anger when it was necessary, when it was needed. So I think that there is a time and a place for being angry. And I have, I find it to be just disheartening and sad the ways that it has affected my faith, because I guess that at one point I probably would have considered myself religious, especially when I was getting more into my faith, more involved in it, and studying it more and all of that. And I would not really consider myself religious at this point in my life. I think that I remember hearing somewhere that, I don't know what saint had said it, but it was something along the lines of share the gospel always, and when necessary, use words. And I used to think that in certain parts of walking through my faith, that it was really important to like be really vocal about your faith and to share it, because if you deny Jesus, then Jesus will deny you, basically. And and wanting people to know and to experience what you have come to know and experience through your faith. But the more that I have gone through my faith, the more that I realize how true it really is that you should share the gospel through your actions more than your words, more than using your words to, I guess, proclaim how or what you believe in. And I think that in learning about the saints, there was one saint in particular. I think I was trying to talk about this before and I got sidetracked, and I can't remember how to pronounce her name. It was like Saint, oh my gosh, it starts with a G. She was raped, and then she ultimately somehow, through like interacting with her abuser, forgave her abuser for these horrific things that he had done to her. And this is very praised, and it's very much like, we are supposed to be saints and we're supposed to live our lives like this, and this is what we're supposed to see as an example and like strive to live as, I guess, in our own lives. And this supernatural ability to forgive in this kind of a way, and and I just, having kids myself, and making it to the point that I have now, working through my own trauma, I do not feel comfortable having my kids believe this and think this way, because I think it's just such a dangerous like way of viewing things and of thinking of things. And I do not want them to feel guilty ever if they need to have some sort of accountability for somebody that has wronged them, for something that has happened to them, where they have a right to be angry, they have a right to seek justice for something. And I think that there's just so much confusion, because it is just hard to know, I guess, how to navigate life after certain things, and incorporate faith into your life. And I don't know, I wanted to just kind of share things that I've been thinking of lately, and things that I have noticed I have been taught, or ways that I have believed, and how now they are changing, and now I'm in this space where it's not that I don't have faith, and it's not that I don't believe. It's just that it is very, very different from what it once was. And yeah, I don't really know. When I think about that, it makes me feel like it's hard to really relate to a lot of people, I think, because I think that even people who have experienced trauma, if they haven't really made it to a certain point, they might be dissociating. They might be just kind of in spaces that maybe I was before in my journey with, my faith and all of that, and not really able to understand or see the perspective that I've reached now, I guess. So I just wanted to share a little bit of my thoughts, a little bit of my journey through it, and to just say, if you are somebody who also has experienced things like this or struggling through things like this, I think that that's okay, and that, God isn't looking at you and saying that somehow, you're the one that is in the wrong for it. I think that He is compassionate, and He is with you, and He is walking with you, literally, and He's not going to leave you. And even though that, I think that has also been a really difficult thing, because you hear things like that, and if you're somebody that has been left, you haven't been saved. Awful, unspeakable things have been allowed to happen, and you hear things like God won't leave you, and it can be really hard to process that and to understand how that could be. But trying to remind yourself that God doesn't leave you, and that He really is with you, even in those moments when those things are happening and occurring. He is with you, and it's not that He is. The hardest thing for me to understand also is that He could stop these things because He is God, and He doesn't, and He allows them. And we wonder, why would God allow that? And we don't always understand, the bigger picture and the bigger plan to things. And I don't know, there's so much that I don't know. But I think that ultimately, He doesn't force us to treat each other with love or with kindness or with respect. That's up to us, whether or not we are going to do that. And He gives us that free will. So when we choose to harm another person in any sort of a way, He doesn't necessarily always intervene or stop it. And it's not Him that is doing it or allowing it necessarily. It's really us as human beings doing it to each other. But again, it becomes really heavy and confusing to think about when you do have this understanding that, like, He has the ability to stop it and He doesn't. And it is really hard, I think, for survivors of trauma to process and to think about and to really sit with. And I think that there's this tendency to just want to sweep things under a rug, or just say, well, everything happens for a reason, or like to try to force yourself to have these perspectives that fit like this kind of more comfortable narrative and like a Christianity kind of perspective. But to actually really sit with it and look at it for all that it is, I think is really, really hard. But this is where I'm at right now, as I'm working through my trauma at this point in my life. Like I said, this is the furthest that I've ever come with it all, and it has been something else. So I don't really have anything else to say, so I will just leave this all at this. And there is a lot more that I could say, but I just can't articulate it right now. So I think I'm going to try to go to bed, and that is it for this one.